Today we light the Advent candle of peace. God has a peaceful dream of the world, and we dream it too. We dream of a peaceful world where nations come together, where war is a memory, and we eat at one table. We light this candle in peace.
Good morning. My name is Rob Borsenius, and I will be giving the message this morning. Before I do that, I'd like to invite you to support Pastor Rich with your prayers as he's in recovery. I talked to him today. I think he's doing okay, and he needs our continued support. I have always believed that it takes a community to raise a child. Since I am not a good one for sermons, I will take the time to relate a story or two from my past growing up in Norway that may show what I mean. My first story is called Christmas Past. Years ago, my family gathered on Christmas Eve to enjoy family and to anticipate Santa. This was a time when stories were told and good food nourished everyone in attendance. At one point during the gathering, one of the adults would distract the children so that the packages could be brought in and placed around the tree. On this one particular Christmas Eve, my Uncle Jim thought he heard the bells of Santa's sleigh. Everyone agreed that they thought they heard the bells from the direction of the back room. So my uncle led all the kids, I was about 5 years old then, and led us to the back room to see if we could witness Santa's arrival. At the time, we lived above the Norway store, and the back room was on the second level above what is now the present-day entrance to the store. Uncle Jim asked us to be very quiet so we could hear the bells. Some of the kids thought they heard them, but they weren't quite sure. When enough time had passed, so all were tired of waiting, we went back to the front room where all were excited about Santa's visit. It seemed he had made his visit. The room was full of gifts and a very large red lounge chair. Our disappointment at missing Santa's arrival was overshadowed by the gift, the one gift we could open on Christmas Eve. And that would satisfy our inquisitive minds for the moment. It was some years later that I was sitting in the kitchen talking with my mother when I brought up that particular moment. How did that huge red lounge chair and all those gifts end up in our house around the Christmas tree? I had searched every closet. I knew there were no gifts in the house. My mother confessed she had enlisted the help of Bob and Floyd Ness for her plan. Bob and Floyd owned the local garage in town. They were always helpful when my mother needed help. She might have bribed them with kringla. I will admit the Ness boys were not always helpful to all. If you wanted to sneak into their lot that held the bones of old vehicles, you might find them very disagreeable. Many visitors interested in what was theirs might find the whole experience disgusting. I'm sure many stories could be told, but I will leave that for another time. They helped in many ways in our community. Any kid with a bike at one point or another needed their assistance. They were always willing to repair a chain or fix a flat tire. The older boys could expect to be taught to fix their own bikes. No charge was the usual cost, with an additional comment as we were leaving to do something nice for someone else someday. Bob and Floyd Ness were also Norway's fire department. It was part of the Serena Fire Protection District, but the Norway Fire Department was how all the kids referred to Bob and Floyd. The firehouse was a small building that would hold just the one fire truck Norway had. It sat across 71 from the Norway store. You can still see it today. Jim Rabalzi owns it. He uses it for storage. When there was a fire, the Nest Boys had a big air horn attached to their huge air compressor in the garage. When you heard the air horn, you knew there was a fire and to please help if you could. Before continuing, I need to explain our school system. I went to a one-room school in Norway that was located where Francesca's Pizza is now. The last year I attended the Norway school, there were 24 kids in 8 grades. There were 2 in my class. There was an emergency door on the south wall of our school. When that fire horn sounded, every student in the school would run for the emergency door, run to the edge of the school property to see if they could tell what direction the fire truck would take. If the older boys thought the fire was near, they would get on their bikes and follow the fire truck. Bob and Floyd would tell them how to help. Bob and Floyd were training our future firefighters. When the boys returned to school, they would share all the details. Everyone wanted to know. It was their time for the spotlight. Public speaking might have been the lesson taught. My second story is called The Christmas Bike. I was 5 years old and I had wanted a bike for as long as I could remember. I had shown my mother pictures from catalogs for weeks. It seemed like longer than that. I think I even had dreams of riding my new bike. Then on Christmas morning of 1952, after gifts were opened, I was led to the hallway where my new bike was standing. It was beautiful. I couldn't believe my eyes, but I could see there was a problem. I was 5. And the bike was a 26-inch. I could sit on it if I held the rail of the stairway, but my feet were far from the pedals. I did not think I would grow big enough to ride my bike by summer, but I would sit on that bike holding onto the rail for hours at a time, dreaming of riding my new bike. When bike riding weather arrived, I was told we could put blocks on my pedals. That would allow me to ride my bike. There was another problem to face. I had not yet learned to ride a bike. And this was one of the biggest problems I could see. So my first job would be to learn to ride a bike, then I would tackle the ride my bike pedal problem. One of my neighbors was Silas Peterson. He was a little older than I, but he had a 24-inch bike. With blocks on his bike, I could just reach the pedals. Silas told me he would help me learn to ride a bike. In what is now the Norsk Museum yard, just east of the one-room school and the Norway store, I spent days going downhill in the grass on Silas's bike. With one tumble after another, I was learning to ride a bike. The thought of riding a bike excited me so, I was having trouble sleeping. When will I be able to ride my bike? After many days, and to tell you the truth, it seemed like years, I learned to ride a bike. I still could not reach the pedals of my bike, but Silas could. We made a pact. Silas could ride my bike until I could reach the pedals. I, in turn, would use Silas's bike. Silas rode my bike for 2 years, as I recall. It was not until much later that I made my discovery. I figured it was an old Norwegian custom. Don't buy a small bike to a growing boy. You let him grow into it. And I did. My bike brought me much joy over the many years. My third story is O'Dilly's Auction Barn. O'Dilly's Auction Barn was an important part of my childhood. It was a store owned by Red and Lou O'Dilly and was open 6 days a week. On Friday nights, however, they had an auction selling whatever merchandise Red had collected that week. These auctions were very well attended. When the parking lot was full for these Friday night doings, the cars parked up and down Illinois 71. I remember the cars parked along the highway from one end of town to the other. The counters in the auction barn used to display their goods at the store, converted to benches for the auction. Red found the inventory to sell or auction in closeouts of stores in and around the Chicagoland area, including the famous Maxwell Street Market. Some of the merchandise Red would acquire would be damaged or would not function as designed. Red became adept at repairing these items. He had watch and jewelry magnifiers permanently attached to his own eyeglasses for easy access at the store. These always fascinated me when I saw Red. I secretly wanted something like that as soon as I was diagnosed with myopia. It never happened. You never knew what you would find at O'Dilly's auction barn. Of course, it depended on what Red found on his journeys buying inventory. That is what kept all the kids in Norway frequent customers to their store. Seeking treasures never went out of style. While Red was off gathering inventory or repairing goods for the store, Lou would mind the store. This brings me to the story I want to tell. It was nearing Christmas, and my brothers and I would want to buy gifts for all the people we loved. We would go to O'Dilly's with all the money we had to shop for Christmas presents. And of course, we would find just the perfect gift for everyone. We would take our goods to the counter when we finished. I was older. I could figure cost and items. I knew I had the money to pay for what I had picked. Chuck, who was 4 years old on this particular trip, kept his money in his secret carrier. I had no idea how much money he had when we left home, and he wouldn't show me. Chuck was always good at saving, so I did not worry. Chuck laid his gifts on the counter with his money. I could see at once he did not have the money to pay for what he had chosen as gifts. Lou was adding up the cost of what Chuck had picked. Lou knew the purpose of our trip. She turned to Chuck and said, "You have just enough." I have to admit, I was a little jealous. I had brought more money, and my gifts were not as nice as his. I never said a thing. I looked at Lou, saw her smile, and that was enough. My last little story. Most towns and villages had in their area a Cub Scout or a Girl Scout or a Boy Scout branch for kids to belong. Norway had a Cub Scout den. Our den mother was Susie Lowe. She had 2 boys Cub Scout age. We met weekly at the Lowe residence. We completed projects and activities to win badges. Some of the merit badges to earn were life safety, insect study, fishing, dog care, bird study, fire safety. Our weekly meetings would always begin with our Cub Scout oath. On my honor, I will do my best to do my duty to God and my country, and to obey the Scout law, to help other people at all times, to keep myself physically strong and mentally awake and morally straight. That doesn't sound like a bad way to live life, does it? I begin my stories with a statement of my belief that I think it takes a town to raise a child. I still believe it. As you go about your day-to-day business, you can see an opportunity to make a difference. I think of the Nike commercial, "Just do it."